Nothing was pulling me out of my midlife crisis till my father passed. And I'm like, you know what? Time is finite. I don't have enough time to still sit here 2 years later and be wallowing in despair and watching my life fall out around me. Now, the third part of this, okay? You've understood their state of being. You've helped pull them up into a more neutral state of being by dealing with whatever the underlying issue is. You've talked to them and you've helped align them with their purpose, right? Now, the next stage of that is the element of fulfillment that comes with being on a purpose-driven mission. It's not necessarily about accomplishing that purpose, because many people who are on a purpose-driven path are never going to reach their destination because it's the journey that matters most. When I think of pastors, when I think of many counselors, when I think of a lot of teachers or first responders, a life well spent helping others is their purpose. And it is enough to get them up and going every single day, spreading a message, spreading peace, spreading joy, spreading education. Hey everyone, welcome to this impromptu episode of the Raising Millionaires, or what's becoming the Wealth Wise Guys podcast. This is going to be a solo meeting. This is really based off of a question that I was asked earlier today that I had an off-the-cuff answer for, but as I thought about it more throughout the day, I realized that there was actually a deeper answer. And for all of you men out there in your 40s, this video is really for you. But it can also be for the wives and the significant others that have to put up with us during this interesting time called the midlife crisis. And what triggers it? What gets us out of it? How do we avoid it? Right? So first off, I was asked this question today. Someone was reflecting on the fact that they had a team member inside of their organization who they believe may be going through a midlife crisis. Someone that I've personally known for about a decade. And it was interesting because they were asking from the perspective of understanding my journey, which, let's give some context to this. My midlife crisis started in April of 2021 with the passing of my mother. It really put me into a dark place, and that dark place combined with bad timing, right? Depression, medication, then multiple surgeries to repair a hip, coupled with medication and a dark spiraling place that I was unable to pull out of. That whole journey really came to its conclusion in November of 2023 then, when I lost my father. So about 2.5 years in this, where I managed to do significant damage to my finances, my career, my relationships, all kinds of really bad things. And when I look at the steps that I took to eventually come out of it, there is this point of reflection on what can someone do to either avoid it, or what can a third party do to help someone acknowledge that they're in it and maybe make better decisions if possible. So let's start with the journey out of, let's call it darkness, because there is, to me, a faith-based element to this that was really a big proponent to my journey. When it started, the midlife crisis, a book was recommended to me by a friend. The book was called Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. What was introduced to me in that book was the concept of the map of consciousness, or the measurement of one's energetic state of being. Now, if that's starting to sound foo-foo, let me make it simpler for you, right? If you are in grief, in shame, if you're in guilt, remorse, those are low-level energy feelings, emotions. And your ability to move up those levels in that map of consciousness into a state of being peaceful or being joyful is very measurable. So if you want to take the foo-foo out of it and you want to put the science or the reality in it, your mood dictates your actions, right? I don't think anybody would disagree with that concept. So if you look at, if you're in a constant state of remorse or regret over the loss of a loved one, or the way you interacted, or the decisions that you made that led up to or happened after their departure, then you're going to stay like in a constant state of depression. And that's, who's going to argue with that, right? If you want to make it complicated and talk about it in a foo-foo sense or the Dr. David Hawkins way, when I came out of it, I want to base this on my personal philosophies now. There was an element of faith through my church and through my pastor that helped a lot. And again, it came with a book recommendation, and it was a book called Breathing Underwater, by, is that David Rohr? Um, Richard Rohr. Sorry, Richard Rohr, the book Breathing Underwater. And although it's a book based on kind of like a religious layering or layer of philosophy laid on top, the big blue book, The 12 Steps of AA, it was super interesting because the book opened up with, you know what? Religion today is all effed up. They've got it completely wrong. It hasn't been right for almost 2,000 years. And that caught my attention, right? We're not going to dive into that too much, but how do those two pieces connect? So the map of consciousness was kind of the acknowledgement of the state of being that I was in. And if you're looking at this from a third party perspective, you have to kind of find the state of being that the person is in based on the criteria of what's going on in their life, right? The research that has been done for decades on the midlife crisis, typically men in their 40s have it based on, right, teenage kids, kids going into college, empty nesting, that basis of more time together with their significant other and less distraction from, say, kids, or the stress that comes from raising kids. Or in many cases, it's the plateau or the decline of a career, right? If you're a salaried employee in many businesses, when you hit your 40s, you're no longer the fresh blood with the fresh ideas. You're probably a middle manager. You're an economic liability in many cases to companies when it comes time to try to trim costs. But the world has transformed a little bit today. So men today in their 40s may have young kids. They may be having kids. They may be 38. They may be 47. They may have a newborn. They may have a second or third or fourth kid on the way. What we're looking for is the trigger, right? What has gone on in their life from a relationship, a family perspective, parent passing, what type of financial trigger may have occurred from a career perspective, or are they living in a 2-bedroom apartment having their second child and now the stresses of needing to buy a home, right? You've got to find the trigger. That isn't always easy to do as a third-party observer, especially if they're not like a close friend or a family. If they're like a team member or they're an associate and you see them struggling, you may not have the insights into exactly what is going on in their life. So now we're looking at the trigger, and the trigger is related to their emotional state. Technically, that would be their state of consciousness in Dr. David Hawkins' Map of Consciousness. And you can Google that and you can look it up, or you can visit my website, rogercbryan.com, and you can find some more information on that and some videos on this YouTube channel about that allow you to see, well, you might be seeing this on Instagram too, where their emotional state is. Now let's break that emotional state into 3 stages, and let's connect that with coming out of this, because there are 3 distinct stages that are best verbalized through a mostly religious context. Let's talk about living in hell, right? Those deep states of depression, despair, regret. Let's talk about moving out of that and into like a normal state of being. And then let's talk about above that being heaven. Now, I'm not talking about the philosophical version of heaven that where you die and you go to this place of eternal bliss. I'm talking about here on earth, living in a hell of the mind, or living in a state of being of peacefulness, of joy, and of love that really can be described as being in heaven on earth. And that in-between stage. Now, what is the difference between the stages? Because if you know the trigger and you know the emotional state of being, you can start to look at, okay, what is it going to take to pull this person out of that state of being or move them up the map of consciousness? The core concept here to move someone out of hell into a neutral state of being, I believe, comes from the concept of the existential vacuum from Viktor Frankl. If you're not familiar with Viktor Frankl, he was a Jewish, teacher, philosopher, scientist in the late 30s, early 40s, who ended up in concentration camps. lost his entire family. In fact, when he was taken away, his wife was taken away. She was pregnant with their firstborn, never saw her again. And he had this book written that he tried to take with him to, I believe he ended up in Auschwitz. I'm not sure if that was his first stop. He tried to take the book with him sewn into his jacket. And like on the first day, one of the other Jewish individuals here is like, don't even try. Just let go of it now. And through his journey, he understood and then taught for the rest of his life this idea that any man with a why can survive anyhow. The idea being that if a man, woman, anyone has a vision for what their life is supposed to be or direction in which they're going, the likelihood of being distracted from that journey is significantly less than someone who is destinationless, right? Someone who doesn't have a long-term goal, someone that doesn't have a vision for exactly what they want out of life, for their family, for their finances, for their fitness, for their health, for their faith. Without direction, right? Minor setbacks can actually seem like they are the end of the world to an individual. If you have a path that you're on and a direction you're going, many of those things can just be speed bumps, right? Things that you can overcome because you are on a mission. And I can say a mission from God. Why would I say that though, when I'm not trying to make this about religion? Well, if you're living in hell, you're living in despair, then the likelihood of a midlife crisis is significant, right? I can make up numbers, but it doesn't really make a difference. That existential vacuum or that lack of purpose in life makes it really hard to survive the day-to-day struggles that human beings face. And we all face them no matter what our situation is. But if you have that purpose, right, and you have something to work towards when you're in that state of deep, dark despair, then you will climb and fight your way out of it to overcome that existential vacuum and get back onto your purpose-driven life. Now, why are men more prone to this than women, right? This isn't science-backed, but many women in these same age brackets often find themselves still as an active mother, right, bringing up children, and that their maternal instinct is to self-sacrifice for those individuals. So what is that? That's a purpose, right? They're less likely to be struggling with an existential vacuum, where a man who might see himself as the need to be a provider, when derailed from that, can see that his ability to map to his purpose has been disrailed, or worse yet, the purpose that he was working towards, i.e. money, success, fame, was so unfulfilling that now that he's derailed from it, it's so easy to let go, right? The idea of working towards wealth versus the idea of working for the sustainability and the survival of your family, right? Men think that that is wealth. Women think that that's the maternal instinct. It's a little different. It might not make sense to everybody, and this is a personal opinion, although backed by quite a lot of psychology, in order to support why men and women face, or why men face midlife crises more often. I joked with the same person that asked this question today that midlife crisis in our parents' generation, right, was typically the man would go out and buy a sports car, trying to feel or hold on to that being young. Today, it's different because the level of societal stress on men is no longer keeping up with keeping up with the Joneses, which is like your neighborhood of people. When they buy a new car, you feel the urge to buy a new car. Today, social media has completely unhinged all of that. And there are people that you see living lives that are mostly, not mostly, in some cases manufactured. Some people are really living them. And you find yourself in this goal of attaining these same things. So now we go back. We're living in hell. We can't overcome our existential vacuum because we lack purpose. Overcoming that existential vacuum is harder because of our perception of what overcoming it means, right? Social media, mansions, cars, planes, all of those different things. Many people can tune that stuff out. I looked it up. The percentage of people in their 40s who are not on social media is very minute. So this isn't an anomaly. This is just the reality of life for many of the people in the generation. I think I'm called a zennial. I came up I was like born in 78. So technically I'm a Gen X, but I'm at the tail end, but I'm not quite a millennial at 82. So they had like a 4 or 5 year gap where by high school, I was surrounded by technology. Gen X is kind of defined as those that like went through all of school before technology began to take hold. When you put all of this together, and you as an individual are looking at someone and you can tell they're going through a midlife crisis, if you were to try to write down 3 things, what do you think their emotional state of being is based on your interactions? Are they in that lower level, or from a Dr. David Hawkins perspective? Now, he doesn't say this, I say this, that those lower levels, those lower emotional states are a state of hell on earth. No good decision ever comes from that state. There is nothing you can do for someone in that state other than try to pull them out of that state. If you try to work on their purpose, right? What are they doing in their career? What are they doing for a business? What are they doing in their finances? If they're in that state of being, you're working on the wrong thing. You have got to understand their state of being, and you've got to try to move them up in that state of being to then deal with their existential vacuum. Have they been on a career path for a decade and all of a sudden realize that this maybe isn't what they want to do with their life? A lot of the reflection that comes in that midlife crisis moment is, why have I spent my life doing what I was doing? Whether it was chasing fame, chasing money, working on a career path that they absolutely despise. Maybe it was just easy. Maybe it was good money at one point, but that good money has not grown with their expectations of what life was supposed to be like. Maybe they've had financial setbacks throughout, and now that career path doesn't provide them with what they need. Maybe their family dynamic is changing and that they want to spend more time doing other things, but see their career path is not providing that time, but they don't know what else to do. When you find that person that's in that state of being that is hell, and in dealing with the existential vacuum, you'll often find a very destructive nature to their being. Not necessarily intentionally, but primarily because of their lack of purpose, their lack of knowing the direction they're going. So they're fighting everything. They're fighting every emotion. They're fighting every person. They're fighting every encounter because they know it's not right, but they don't know what is right. And that's where things start to unravel. That's where businesses fail, relationships fail, finances fall apart. The decisions that are made when they're in that state of being are destructive. And you as a third person, if you're trying to deal with the external of it and not paying attention to the emotional state first, you're going to fail to help them move along. Often, even with the right understanding of the situation, right? We've talked about their emotional state of being. We've talked about their purpose and knowing which one you're working on. Even when you do understand that, depending upon your position in their life, your interaction may still not help them in any way, right? They may be on a journey that is going to require some type of event to pull them out of it, right? Nothing was pulling me out of my midlife crisis till my father passed. And I'm like, you know what? Time is finite. I don't have enough time to still sit here 2 years later and be wallowing in despair and watching my life fall around me. Now, the third part of this, okay, you've understood their state of being. You've helped pull them up into a more neutral state of being by dealing with whatever the underlying issue is. You've talked to them and you've helped align them with their purpose, right? Now, the next stage of that is the element of fulfillment that comes with being on a purpose-driven mission. It's not necessarily about accomplishing that purpose, because many people who are on a purpose-driven path are never going to reach their destination because it's the journey that matters most. When I think of pastors, when I think of many counselors, when I think of a lot of teachers or first responders, right? A life well spent helping others is their purpose, and it is enough to get them up and going every single day. Spreading a message, spreading peace, spreading joy, spreading education, watching other people benefit and blossom from their experience and their understanding of the world. So now you have this individual, you've understood their mental state of being, their emotional state of being. You've now been able to help them define their purpose. Now they have to have a path to walk along. And if you can help them find that path, right? And they're like, yes, right? I've got all of this emotional stuff taken care of. I have defined what it is that I want to do. How many people actually do that? I wish it was more. Hopefully this video will help more people to find that. Then you've got to help them walk that path the best that you possibly can. Again, Your sphere of influence over this individual is going to dictate your ability to participate in any part of this journey. And if you interject yourself into the wrong part, then you're going to fail and probably make things worse for the individual. I've seen that happen, and I've seen people that have really tried to help me along the way, but I didn't have this level of understanding of what the journey looked like. So I don't believe that they did either. In reflection now, I see their efforts with others as part of the learning journey that came from their experience in dealing with my journey. If that makes any sense. Everyone learns from experience, and part of your journey can be to help other people to not struggle as much with these types of situations. So, things that I would recommend: read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning to get an understanding of the existential vacuum so that you understand the transition from hell to neutrality. Read Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, or any of his other books that use the map of consciousness to understand how the emotional, energetic state of being is going to dictate someone's ability to accomplish certain things in life. Someone living in hell is never going to be able to define purpose and work on a journey towards that purpose. You get him into neutrality, and then that purpose-driven life becomes theirs. There's a book called Purpose-Driven Life. Don't remember the author. If maybe the religious stuff doesn't sit well with you and you want to dismiss some of this because of that, read Richard Rohr's Breathing Underwater. Even though he is a Franciscan monk who wrote it, he is the most brutally honest person about how the religion of Christianity and what Jesus taught died in the year 200. And the Romans bastardized it in order to use it to control the populace. That's a whole nother conversation. But what I'm trying to do is say that, like, if my dad grew up as an atheist and I struggled with spirituality for most of my adult life, these were some of the contexts that helped me understand what I needed in order to pursue or get back on my path. I pray for you and the individual that you're trying to help, or if you are the individual going through this, that this information will give you some context to at least better understand what you or that person is going through. We cannot fix something that we can't diagnose. And we can diagnose this by understanding our emotional state of being, our purpose, and our journey towards this purpose. How does this all culminate for you as an individual or for the person that you're trying to help as you raise their energetic level out of hell into neutrality? Get them onto a purpose-driven life, get them onto a path. They are working towards a state of being, of joy, of peace, of happiness. Some would call it heaven. Some might call it heaven on earth. Some might call it Eden. Some might call it utopia, nirvana. Some might just call it being effing happy. Let it be whatever you want it to be. Don't worry about what it needs to be labeled. But you do not get there until you work your way through these other things. My midlife crisis, 2.5 years, darkest years of my life, super destructive. I look back on them now, and although there was a trigger, there were complications in the middle of it that were a little bit out of my control. There were decisions that I made that I wish I could take back. I see when I came out of it on my reflection of it, exactly why I went through that journey, and I understand it. I try not to regret it. I try not to look back on it. I look forward to fulfilling my purpose of helping people to become 1% better every day. And that fulfills me enough to do videos like this and to hope and pray that you get the same experience. All right, if you like this video, click the subscribe button. Check out the other videos. You can look up Dr. David Hawkins. You can look up Breathing Underwater, Richard Rohr, Map of Consciousness. There's a bunch of stuff on my channels all about these topics. I hope it helps you, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.